Have you ever wondered what happens when the romance scripted for the silver screen spills over into real life with explosive consequences? Behind the carefully crafted public images and studio-approved romances of Hollywood's golden age lay a tangled web of forbidden passions, bitter rivalries, and scandals that threatened to destroy not just careers, but lives. These weren't just affairs. They were emotional battlegrounds where love and ambition collided with devastating results. Join us as we pull back the velvet curtain on the most catastrophic love triangles that didn't just break hearts. They shattered Hollywood's very foundation and transformed the entertainment landscape forever. Bette Davis, William Wiler, and Miriam Hopkins. The explosive relationship between Bette Davis and director William Wiler began on the set of Jezebel in 1938, a film that would earn Davis her second Academy Award. Their creative partnership quickly evolved into a passionate affair, despite Wiler being married at the time. The real drama, however, unfolded when actress Miriam Hopkins entered the picture. Hopkins and Davis had a complicated history before Wiler became involved. They had previously co-starred in The Old Maid, where their off-screen rivalry mirrored their on-screen competition. Hopkins, known for her jealous temperament, had always resented Davis's rising star power, believing the studios favored Davis unfairly. When Hopkins discovered the affair between Davis and Wiler, Hollywood insiders whispered that she orchestrated a calculated campaign to sabotage their relationship. At industry parties, Hopkins would loudly recount Davis's unflattering behind-the-scenes behavior, embellishing stories about Davis's demanding nature and alleged mistreatment of crew members. Davis, never one to back down from confrontation, retaliated in the press. In an unguarded moment during an interview with Photoplay magazine, she remarked, "Working with Miriam is like being slowly poisoned with small doses of arsenic. By the time you notice, it's already too late." The feud reached its boiling point when all three were invited to a prominent producer's dinner party in 1940. Eyewitnesses reported that Hopkins deliberately spilled red wine on Davis's white gown, leading to a heated exchange that nearly became physical before guests intervened. Wiler, caught between the two formidable women, reportedly left the party early, unwilling to choose sides publicly. Studio executives, concerned about the negative publicity, attempted to reconcile the actresses by casting them together again in Old Acquaintance. The plan backfired spectacularly. On set, Davis allegedly redesigned Hopkins's lighting to cast unflattering shadows on her face. What made this triangle particularly explosive was not just the romantic entanglement, but the professional consequences. Davis later admitted in her autobiography that Wiler had been the love of my life, but their relationship collapsed under the weight of Hopkins's interference and Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight. Film historian Barbara Leeming noted, "The Davis-Hopkins-Wiler triangle wasn't just a private matter. It influenced the kinds of roles both actresses selected, the directors they worked with, and ultimately shaped the trajectory of American cinema in the 1940s. Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, and Lily Deita. Few on-screen partnerships captured the imagination of audiences like that of Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. Across 8 films, including the swashbuckling adventure Captain Blood and the romantic epic They Died with Their Boots On, their chemistry was undeniable, sparking persistent rumors of an off-screen romance. The reality was far more complicated. Flynn, Hollywood's quintessential bad boy, had married French actress Lily Deita in 1935, just as his star was rising. The marriage was tumultuous from the start, with Deita's fiery temperament clashing with Flynn's wandering eye and reckless lifestyle. When Flynn began working with the young, refined de Havilland, something changed in him. Friends of Flynn noted that he seemed genuinely transformed in her presence, trading his notorious carousing for long, intellectual conversations. De Havilland, for her part, was drawn to Flynn's charismatic energy, but wary of his reputation. "There was something between us that never made it to the bedroom," de Havilland confessed decades later to a film biographer. "It was a connection of souls that was perhaps more powerful precisely because it remained unfulfilled." Deita, sensing the emotional affair developing between her husband and de Havilland, launched a campaign of public humiliation. At the premiere of The Adventures of Robin Hood, Deita reportedly arrived uninvited and created a scene, loudly questioning her husband's whereabouts when he was scheduled to take photographs with de Havland. The tension escalated when Deita began calling gossip columnists, including the powerful Hedda Hopper, feeding them stories about de Haviland's alleged pursuit of married men. De Havland, raised with strict Victorian values and protective of her reputation, was devastated. The triangle reached its breaking point during the filming of Santa Fe Trail. Flynn, torn between his marriage and his feelings for de Haviland, began drinking heavily on set. During one particularly tense scene, he allegedly whispered to de Haviland, "I've made a mess of everything, haven't I?" To which she reportedly replied, "We both have." When they did work together on their final film, they died with their boots on. Observers noted a palpable sense of resignation between them. Deita and Flynn finally divorced in 1942, but by then, the moment for Flynn and de Haviland had passed. Flynn spiraled further into alcoholism and legal troubles, while de Haviland focused on establishing herself as a serious, dramatic actress. Years later, when Flynn died at just 50 in 1959, de Haviland was filming in Paris. Upon hearing the news, she reportedly locked herself in her hotel room for a full day. When she emerged, she refused to discuss Flynn, a silence she would maintain until late in her life when she finally acknowledged, "What we had was a love that never found its proper time." Gary Cooper, Patricia Neal, and Rocky Cooper. When Patricia Neal arrived in Hollywood in 1949, fresh from Broadway success, she was unprepared for the emotional tempest that awaited her. Cast opposite Gary Cooper in The Fountainhead, the 23-year-old actress found herself irresistibly drawn to her 48-year-old married co-star. Cooper, married to New York socialite Veronica Rocky, Cooper, since 1933, was Hollywood royalty. Yet something about the intelligent, vibrant Neal broke through his reserved exterior, igniting a passion that would scandalize Hollywood. Their affair began discreetly but intensified rapidly. Cooper, torn between his marriage and his new love, began spending less time at home, explaining his absences as work commitments. Rocky, however, was no naive housewife. Well connected in Hollywood social circles, she soon heard whispers about her husband's infidelity. Rather than confronting Cooper privately, Rocky chose a more devastating approach. At a high-profile Hollywood fundraiser in 1950, with the industry's elite in attendance, Rocky approached Neal at the bar. Eyewitnesses reported that she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I've known about you and Coop for some time. If you want him, you can have him, along with his bills, his daughters, and his ulcers." The affair continued despite the public humiliation, but Rocky wasn't finished. She mobilized powerful friends, including gossip columnists Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, who began publishing increasingly vicious articles about Neal, painting her as a homewrecker. Suddenly, Neal found herself being disinvited from industry events and overlooked for prime roles. Director Howard Hawks, who had planned to cast Neal in his next project, later admitted, "The studios were afraid of her. No one wanted to touch the woman who tried to steal Gary Cooper." Neal later reflected in her autobiography, "I was young and didn't understand the power of a wife in Hollywood. Rocky didn't just fight for her husband. She fought for her position, her social standing, her entire identity." The triangle became even more complex when Rocky's close friend, actress Joan Crawford, entered the fray. Crawford, always loyal to her friends, allegedly called Neal's agent and threatened to use her influence to blacklist Neal if the affair didn't end. The pressure became unbearable when Neal discovered she was pregnant with Cooper's child. Faced with career destruction and Cooper's ultimate unwillingness to leave his family, Neal made the heartbreaking decision to terminate the pregnancy. Cooper eventually returned to his marriage, begging Rocky's forgiveness in what Hollywood insiders described as a choreographed public reconciliation. The couple appeared together at the 1953 Academy Awards, presenting a united front while Neal watched from home, her invitation mysteriously lost in the mail. The aftermath was brutal for Neal. Her career stalled, and she eventually left Hollywood for England, where she rebuilt her life and career away from the shadow of the scandal. Cooper and Rocky remained married until his death in 1961, though friends reported their relationship was never the same. Ava Gardner, Frank Sinatra, and Mia Farrow. The whirlwind romance between Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner in the early 1950s captivated America. Their passionate, volatile relationship, culminating in marriage in 1951 after Sinatra left his wife Nancy, was tabloid fodder for years. Even after their 1957 divorce, their connection remained profound, with Sinatra reportedly calling Gardner the love of his life, and Gardner keeping his photograph by her bedside until her death. So, when 49-year-old Sinatra began dating 19-year-old Mia Farrow in 1964, Hollywood was stunned, none more so than Gardner, who initially dismissed the relationship as Frank's midlife crisis. When it became clear the relationship was serious, Gardner's reaction was anything but composed. At a private dinner party hosted by director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, Gardner, several martinis in, allegedly confronted Sinatra about Pharaoh. "What does she have that I don't have, besides 30 less years?" she reportedly asked, loud enough for other guests to hear. Sinatra, uncharacteristically silent, simply left the room. The public humiliation continued when Gardner gave an unguarded interview to a British tabloid saying, "I always knew Frank liked them young, but I didn't think he'd become a nursery school teacher." Pharaoh, despite her youth, refused to be cast as the naive victim. At the premiere of Rosemary's Baby, when a reporter asked how it felt to follow in Gardner's footsteps, Pharaoh coolly replied, "I don't follow in anyone's footsteps. I make my own path." The feud intensified when Gardner began appearing at Sinatra's performances, deliberately sitting where he could see her. According to Sinatra's valet, George Jacobs, Ava knew exactly what she was doing. She'd wear something low-cut, make sure Frank spotted her, then leave before the show ended. It drove him crazy, and it drove Miss Pharaoh even crazier. Pharaoh and Sinatra married in 1966, but the relationship was strained from the start, partly due to Gardner's lingering presence in Sinatra's life. When Sinatra demanded that Pharaoh abandon her role in Rosemary's Baby to appear in his film The Detective, she refused, choosing her career over his ultimatum. Sinatra responded by having divorce papers delivered to her on the set. The aftermath was particularly difficult for Pharaoh, who found herself ostracized by Sinatra's powerful friends. Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., loyal to both Sinatra and Gardner, noticeably cooled toward Pharaoh. At an industry event in 1969, Davis allegedly turned his back when Pharaoh approached his table. Years later, Gardner grudgingly acknowledged her talent, telling a friend, "Maybe there was more to the little girl than I thought." By then, however, the damage had been done, leaving all three forever linked in one of Hollywood's most painful triangles: Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, and Mayo Method. Before Lauren Bacall became an overnight sensation at 19, starring opposite Humphrey Bogart in 1944's To Have and Have Not, Bogart was trapped in a volatile marriage to actress Mayo Method. Their relationship was so turbulent that Hollywood nicknamed them the Battling Bogarts, with their alcohol-fueled arguments frequently spilling into public view. Method, once a respected Broadway and film actress, had seen her career decline while Bogart's star rose. Her increasing alcoholism and paranoia, she was known to accuse Bogart of affairs, sometimes at knife point, had created an unbearable home situation. Yet Bogart, adhering to a personal code of loyalty, refused to leave her. When Bacall arrived on set for her first major film role, the chemistry between her and Bogart was immediate and electric. Word of the on-set attraction quickly reached Method, who began appearing unexpectedly during filming, creating scenes that halted production. On one occasion, she allegedly confronted Bacall in the studio commissary, loudly asking, "So you're the little whore who's trying to steal my husband?" Bacall, maintaining her composure, simply walked away. The situation deteriorated when Method began calling gossip columnists, offering damaging stories about Bacall in exchange for favorable coverage. Luella Parsons, initially sympathetic to Method, published a column questioning Bacall's acting abilities and suggesting she was using feminine wiles to advance her career. Bogart, torn between his marriage vows and his growing feelings for Bacall, attempted to end the relationship after filming Wrapped. In a letter to Bacall that later surfaced in a biographer's research, he wrote, "What I feel for you frightens me, but I have responsibilities I cannot abandon, no matter how much I might want to." Reached a breaking point during a Warner Brothers function where all three were present. Method, heavily intoxicated, created a scene by throwing a drink in Bacall's face and shouting, "He'll never leave me for a child." Studio security escorted her out, but the damage was done. Faced with losing both his new love and his professional standing, Bogart finally filed for divorce in February 1945. Methot, already struggling with alcoholism, spiraled further. She gave a disastrous interview to Picture World magazine where she called Bacall a homewrecker in training bras and predicted the relationship wouldn't last a year. Bogart and Bacall married in May 1945, beginning what would become one of Hollywood's most celebrated marriages. Methot, meanwhile, retreated from public life, returning to her hometown of Portland, Oregon. She died in 1951 from complications related to alcoholism, having never professionally acted again after the divorce. The tragedy of the triangle wasn't lost on Bacall, who wrote in her autobiography, "I never wanted to be the reason for anyone's destruction. Mayo was a talented woman defeated by her own demons, and I sometimes wonder if things might have been different had Bogey and I never met." Vivien Leigh, Laurence Olivier, and Joan Fontaine. The incandescent love affair between Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier began in 1936, while both were married to others, Leigh to barrister Herbert Lee Holman and Olivier to actress Jill Esmond. Their passion, described by contemporaries as all-consuming, led them to abandon their respective marriages and embark on a relationship that would define them both personally and professionally. By the time they married in 1940, they were hailed as theater royalty, their union seemingly blessed by both critical acclaim and public adoration. Leigh's increasing mental instability, later diagnosed as bipolar disorder, created unpredictable swings between euphoria and devastating depression. Olivier, struggling to support her while managing his own career, found himself increasingly drawn to stable, nurturing friendships. Fontaine, fresh from her Oscar win for Suspicion and having recently divorced her first husband, developed a close friendship with Olivier during the filming of Rebecca. Their relationship was initially intellectual and professional, with Fontaine seeking Olivier's guidance on Shakespeare and classical theater. Leigh, however, saw something more threatening. At a dinner party hosted by director Alfred Hitchcock in 1943, Leigh reportedly confronted Fontaine, accusing her of hovering like a vulture, waiting for my marriage to fail. Fontaine, stunned by the outburst, later told her sister, Olivia de Havilland, that Leigh seemed possessed by a jealousy that had no basis in reality. The situation deteriorated when Leigh, during an episode of Mania, showed up uninvited to a rehearsal where Olivier and Fontaine were working. According to stage manager Richard Stern, she accused them of having an affair, throwing a script at Fontaine before being gently escorted out by Olivier. Fontaine, unwilling to be cast as the villain, fought back through carefully placed comments to the press. When asked about working with Olivier, she praised his professionalism while noting, "It must be difficult for him, balancing his extraordinary talent with personal challenges at home." The comment, seemingly sympathetic, was a barbed reminder of Leigh's increasing instability. The feud became public knowledge when Leigh, attending a theatrical awards ceremony where both Olivier and Fontaine were present, refused to applaud when Fontaine won a prestigious theater award. Photographers captured the moment, and the image of Leigh sitting stone-faced while the room celebrated Fontaine became a powerful symbol of their animosity. Fontaine respected his request, but the damage was done. Leigh, convinced that Fontaine had attempted to steal her husband, never forgave her. Even years later, when both women were cast in separate productions at the same theater festival, organizers had to create elaborate schedules to ensure they never crossed paths. The triangle had lasting consequences for all involved. Leigh's mental health continued to deteriorate, leading to the eventual collapse of her marriage to Olivier in 1960. Olivier, burdened by guilt over both his inability to help Leigh and his treatment of Fontaine, retreated into his work, Lana Turner, Johnny Stompinado, and Cheryl Crane. When Lana Turner met Johnny Stompinado in 1957, she was already Hollywood royalty, the original sweater girl whose tragic characters on screen often mirrored her tumultuous personal life. At 37, Turner had weathered 4 failed marriages and established herself as one of MGM's most bankable stars. Stompinado, a handsome ex-Marine with slicked-back hair and an enigmatic smile, seemed like just another admirer when he sent orchids to her dressing room. What Turner didn't know was that Stompinado was also an enforcer for notorious gangster Mickey Cohen, with a history of violence against women carefully concealed beneath his charming exterior. By the time this information reached her, she was already entangled in a relationship that would lead to one of Hollywood's most shocking scandals. Lana was drawn to danger, recalled actress Ava Gardner, who had warned her friend about Stompinado. She mistook possessiveness for passion, and by the time she realized her mistake, he had already isolated her from everyone who might have helped. The third point in this tragic triangle was Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane. Raised primarily by her grandmother while Turner made movies, Cheryl had recently come to live with her mother, hoping to finally build the relationship she had craved. Instead, she found herself witness to an increasingly frightening domestic situation. The situation reached a breaking point during the 1958 Academy Awards season. Turner, nominated for Best Actress for Peyton Place, had been explicitly forbidden by studio executives to bring Stompinado to the ceremony due to his known mob connections. Enraged by what he perceived as a public humiliation, Stompinado threatened Turner's life before she left for the event. "He held a razor to my face," Turner confided to her makeup artist. "He said if I didn't bring him as my date, I wouldn't have a face left to show the cameras." Turner attended alone, but friends noted she appeared distracted and frightened throughout the evening, repeatedly checking the time. When Turner returned home after losing the Oscar to Joanne Woodward, witnesses reported hearing a violent argument erupting from her Beverly Hills mansion. Cheryl, listening from her bedroom, became increasingly terrified as Stompinado's threats escalated. What happened next would become one of Hollywood's most notorious incidents. Hearing Stompinado threaten to disfigure her mother, Cheryl grabbed a kitchen knife and rushed to the bedroom. In the confrontation that followed, Stompinado was stabbed once in the abdomen and died on Turner's bedroom floor. The aftermath was a media circus unlike anything Hollywood had seen. Turner, who had built her career on playing femme fatales, now found herself cast in a real-life noir drama. Rumors swirled that she had actually killed Stompinado herself and allowed her daughter to take the blame. At the coroner's inquest, Turner delivered what many considered the performance of her lifetime, testifying through tears about Stompinado's abuse, while hundreds of reporters documented every word. The jury ruled the death a justifiable homicide, and Cheryl was made a ward of the court rather than facing criminal charges. Rita Hayworth, Orson Welles, and Prince Ali Khan. When Rita Hayworth married boy genius Orson Welles in 1943, it seemed like the perfect union of Hollywood's most beautiful woman and its most brilliant director. Hworth, the Brooklyn-born dancer who had transformed herself into the ultimate screen goddess, had finally found an intellectual equal in Welles, whose Citizen Kane had revolutionized filmmaking. Their daughter Rebecca was born in December 1944, completing what appeared to be a perfect family. Behind closed doors, however, the marriage was unraveling. Welles, notorious for his wandering attention both professionally and personally, increasingly left Hworth alone while he pursued new film projects and, as rumors suggested, new romantic interests. Orson needed to conquer, not to connect, Hworth confided to costume designer Jean Louis. Once he felt he had won me, he began looking for the next challenge. Welles's intellectual intensity, initially attractive to Hworth, who had been denied formal education, became a source of insecurity as he made little effort to hide his boredom with what he called Hollywood conversations. The couple separated and reconciled several times before finally divorcing in 1947. Hworth, emotionally devastated and professionally adrift, embarked on a European vacation to escape the painful dissolution of her marriage and the relentless publicity it generated. It was in Cannes that she met Prince Ali Khan, son of the spiritual leader of millions of Ismaili Muslims and one of the world's wealthiest men. Sophisticated, charming, and obsessively devoted to Hworth, the prince seemed to offer everything Welles had withheld: undivided attention, public adoration, and emotional stability. Their courtship was a global sensation. Khan showered Hworth with extravagant gifts, including a heart-shaped diamond engagement ring and a palatial estate on the French Riviera. When they married in 1949, the ceremony made international headlines, transforming Hworth from movie star to real-life princess. Welles, struggling with his own career setbacks and watching his ex-wife's fairy tale romance unfold in the press, responded with barely concealed bitterness. During a radio interview ostensibly promoting his latest project, he remarked, "It seems fitting that the woman who played Salome should now be in the arms of a prince from the desert. One hopes the ending will be happier for her than it was for Salome. The thinly veiled reference to the biblical dancer who lost her head did not go unnoticed by the press. The comment infuriated Khan, who had been working to establish his legitimacy in Western diplomatic circles. Through intermediaries, he demanded a public apology, which Wells refused to provide. Instead, Wells doubled down, telling columnist Hedda Hopper, "I wish Rita every happiness with her new husband. I just question whether a woman who had trouble adjusting to life in Hollywood will find herself more at home in the Islamic world." The subtle cultural slur provoked Khan to action. At a high-profile charity gala in Paris, where all three were present, Khan deliberately snubbed Wells, turning his back when the director approached. Witnesses reported that Hworth, caught between her husband and ex-husband, appeared mortified by the public display of animosity. The triangle took an unexpected turn when Khan's jet-setting lifestyle and reluctance to give up his playboy ways began troubling Hworth. Just 2 years into their marriage, she filed for divorce, citing extreme mental cruelty, and returned to Hollywood with their daughter Yasmin. Wells, rather than offering support to his ex-wife during this difficult transition, publicly commented, "Rita always leaves when things get complicated. It's easier than staying to fix what's broken." The remark struck many as hypocritical, coming from a man whose own attention span was notoriously short. Khan, meanwhile, launched an aggressive custody battle for Yasmin, suggesting that Hworth was an unfit mother due to her Hollywood lifestyle. The implication was particularly cruel, given Hworth's well-known devotion to her children. When reporters asked about Khan's claims, Hworth tearfully responded, "He wants to take my child to a country where women are still veiled and have no rights. I would rather die than let that happen." The custody battle became a proxy war for larger cultural tensions, with Hworth positioned as the American woman fighting Eastern traditions. Khan's attorneys hinted that Wells was influencing Hworth's resistance, suggesting the director was manipulating his ex-wife out of spite. The three-way feud reached its peak when Khan offered Hworth a $1 million settlement in exchange for raising Yasmin in his faith and spending summers in Europe. Before Hworth could respond, Wells gave an unauthorized interview, claiming that he was advising Hworth to refuse any compromise. Khan, furious at the interference, withdrew the offer entirely. Eventually, Hworth retained custody of Yasmin, but the emotional cost was enormous. Her famous vibrancy dimmed, and she began showing early signs of the Alzheimer's disease that would eventually claim her life. Her career, once meteoric, never fully recovered from the scandal. Film historian Janine Basinger noted, "The Hworth-Wells-Khan triangle revealed how vulnerable even the most powerful women in Hollywood really were." Rita's transformation from the confident Gilda, who could stop a room with a hair toss, to a woman fighting desperately to keep her child marked a turning point in how the public viewed female stars, not as untouchable goddesses, but as women navigating impossible choices. In a final ironic twist, after Hworth's death in 1987, it was revealed that Wells had never stopped carrying a photograph of her in his wallet, even through his subsequent marriages. When asked about it in his final interview, he simply said, "There was only one Rita, Spencer Tracy, Katherine Hepburn, and Louise Tracy." Few Hollywood relationships have been more mythologized than the 26-year love affair between Spencer Tracy and Katherine Hepburn. Their on-screen chemistry across 9 films captivated audiences, while their off-screen romance remained officially unacknowledged during Tracy's lifetime due to one immovable fact. Tracy was married to Louise Treadwell Tracy and never divorced her. Louise and Spencer had married in 1923, long before his Hollywood success. Their son John was born deaf in 1924, a circumstance that profoundly affected the family. Louise dedicated herself to creating educational opportunities for deaf children, eventually founding the John Tracy Clinic, which became a pioneering institution in deaf education. When Tracy met Hepburn on the set of Woman of the Year in 1942, he was already an established star with a troubled marriage, but a firm commitment to remaining officially wed to Louise. His Catholic faith prohibited divorce, but those close to him suggested his devotion to his son's welfare was an equally powerful motivation. Spencer carried crushing guilt about John's deafness, revealed a longtime MGM makeup artist. He irrationally blamed himself, believing it was some sort of divine punishment for his own shortcomings. Leaving Louise would have been, in his mind, the final unforgivable abandonment. Hepburn, fiercely independent and unused to compromise, nevertheless accepted the unusual arrangement. Their relationship was an open secret in Hollywood, with studio executives, colleagues, and journalists maintaining a code of silence that would be unimaginable in today's media environment. Louise, however, was not the passive, unaware wife often portrayed in simplified accounts. According to family friend Garson Kanan, Louise knew exactly what was happening. She chose to focus on her work with deaf children while maintaining the dignity of her position as Spencer's legal wife. It wasn't acceptance, it was endurance. The triangle's most explosive moment came in 1945 when Photoplay magazine nearly published an expose on the relationship. Louise, learning of the impending article, made a rare intervention. She contacted Louis B. Mayer directly, reportedly telling the powerful studio head, "If this story runs, I will give an exclusive interview about Spencer's drinking and behavior toward his family. Is that what MGM wants for its leading man?" The article was killed immediately, but the incident created lasting tension. Tracy, humiliated by his wife's necessary intervention, increased his drinking. Hepburn, realizing how quickly her carefully constructed world could collapse, became even more protective of their privacy. The situation deteriorated further when Tracy and Hepburn filmed State of the Union, playing a married couple navigating political ambitions and infidelity. The parallels to their real situation were uncomfortably obvious, particularly in scenes where Tracy's character must choose between his wife and his lover. During filming, Louise made an unprecedented visit to the set, ostensibly to discuss funding for her clinic with MGM executives. Her actual purpose, according to assistant director Joseph Hoffman, was to remind both stars that she remained a factor in their lives. The incident created ripples throughout Hollywood. Director George Cukor, a close friend of Hepburn's, allegedly canceled social engagements with Louise, choosing sides in a way that further isolated her. Louise responded by ensuring her charitable work received prominent coverage in the same publications that celebrated Tracy and Hepburn films, a subtle reminder of her legitimate position in Tracy's life. As years passed, the triangle settled into an uneasy equilibrium. Tracy lived openly with Hepburn while maintaining financial support for Louise and making occasional public appearances with her when required for his image. Louise built her identity around her advocacy work rather than her marriage, though she never relinquished the Tracy name or its associated status. The most revealing moment came after Tracy's death in 1967. Hepburn, who had been with him during his final days, did not attend his funeral out of respect for Louise. When reporters asked Louise about Hepburn at the service, she simply said, "I thought she was a fine actress. Spencer always spoke highly of the people he worked with: Clark Gable, Carole Lombard, and Rhea Langham." When Clark Gable met Carole Lombard on the set of No Man of Her Own in 1932, their interaction was notably unremarkable. Gable was married to his second wife, socialite Maria Rhea Langham, a sophisticated woman 17 years his senior who had helped transform him from a rough-edged former lumberjack and theater mechanic into MGM's rising star. Lombard, then married to actor William Powell, found Gable attractive but aloof. 4 years later, when they reconnected at a Hollywood party, everything had changed. Lombard was now divorced, and Gable's marriage to Langham had deteriorated into a largely formal arrangement. The attraction was immediate and overwhelming. When Clark and Carole looked at each other across that room, something elemental happened, remembered director Mervyn LeRoy, who witnessed their reunion. It was like watching a lightning strike. What followed was among the most famous romances in Hollywood history, but the road to their eventual marriage was complicated by Langham's refusal to grant Gable a divorce. Her hesitation wasn't simply emotional, it was financial. Under their marriage contract, waiting until 1938 would significantly increase her settlement. Langham, unlike the public image of the discarded wife, was a formidable strategist. Born to wealth and independently connected to Hollywood power brokers, she had initially married Gable, partly because she recognized his potential when he was still playing bit parts. She had invested in his career, paid for his dental work, and taught him the social graces needed to navigate Hollywood's elite circles. As Gable's relationship with Lombard became serious, Langham employed subtle tactics to remind the industry of her legitimate position. She continued attending important industry functions, maintained relationships with studio executives' wives, and strategically mentioned "my husband Clark" in conversations with gossip columnists. Lombard, known for her uninhibited personality and colorful language, found herself in the unusual position of having to restrain her natural exuberance. Studio publicists warned her that appearing too eager while Gable remained married would damage her good girl image with female fans. The situation reached a flashpoint at the 1937 Academy Awards, where Gable was nominated for Mutiny on the Bounty. Protocol dictated he attend with his legal wife, but he insisted on bringing Lombard. MGM head Louis B. Mayer intervened personally, summoning Gable to his office. Mayer told him in no uncertain terms that he would attend with Rhea or face suspension, recalled MGM publicity director Howard Strickling. When Clark argued, Mayer reminded him that his contract included a morality clause. It was the only time I ever saw Gable back down. Lombard, excluded from the ceremony, threw a rival party the same night, inviting photographers to document her celebration, surrounded by friends. When Gable lost the Oscar to Victor McLaglen, Lombard reportedly sent him a one-word telegram, karma. Langham, aware of her temporary victory, pressed her advantage. At a dinner party hosted by director W.S. Van Dyke, she allegedly approached Lombard and said, "Enjoy playing house with my husband while you can. I'm the only Mrs. Gable recognized by law, church, and studio contract." Lombard, uncharacteristically restrained, simply excused herself from the table. The feud escalated when Langham began suggesting to friends that Lombard's reputation as a comedian reflected her lack of dramatic talent and intellectual depth. When these comments reached Lombard, she retaliated by sending Langham a dictionary bookmark placed at the word obsolete, a cutting reference to the age difference between Langham and Gable. As the divorce negotiations dragged on, Langham employed another tactic. She developed a friendly relationship with gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, Luella Parsons' rival. Through this connection, she ensured that any coverage of Gable and Lombard included references to his ongoing marriage and her patient understanding during this difficult time. Lombard, frustrated by the portrayal, confronted Hopper at a press event, reportedly telling her, "Write what you want about me, but stop making that woman sound like a saint. She's holding a man hostage for money, not love." Hopper, delighted by the outburst, quoted it directly in her next column. When Langham finally granted the divorce in March 1939, she received a settlement of $286,000, an enormous sum that reflected both Gable's stardom and his desperation to marry Lombard. MGM executives, concerned about the financial precedent, briefly considered not renewing Gable's contract before recognizing his irreplaceable value to the studio. Gable and Lombard married 3 weeks after his divorce was finalized, beginning what colleagues described as the happiest period of Gable's life. Their marriage, however, was tragically brief. In January 1942, Lombard died in a plane crash while returning from a war bond tour, leaving Gable devastated. In a final twist to the triangle, when Gable was overcome with grief, it was Langham who wrote him a condolence letter that friends described as remarkably generous. She reminded him of Lombard's vibrant spirit and suggested that she would want you to continue living with the same enthusiasm she brought to every day. Gable, moved by the unexpected kindness from a woman he had once hurt deeply, kept the letter in his personal effects until his death in 1960. So, as the curtains fall on these tangled romances, one truth remains. Behind every glossy studio portrait lay real hearts beating to their own unruly rhythm, sometimes in perfect sync, more often in agonizing discord. These triangles left scars and legends in equal measure, reshaping careers, testing loyalties, and reminding us that fame offers no protection from the messiness of love. Thanks for stepping back in time with me. If you'd like more untold tales from cinema's shadowy corners, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss our next dive into Hollywood history. Until then, keep the reels turning and the stories alive.